It was late October 1804 along the Missouri River near what is now Bismarck, North Dakota. People from the Mandan villages along the Missouri saw 3 boats coming upriver, carrying 43 men looking for a place to encamp for the winter before the river froze. Great numbers on both sides flocked down to the bank to view us, wrote one of those men, William Clark. Clark and a fellow Virginian, Meriwether Lewis, introduced themselves. They were co-leaders of the Corps of Discovery, sent by the President of the United States, Thomas Jefferson, to explore the Louisiana Purchase, a vast sweep of land west of the Mississippi River that Jefferson had bought from the French the year before, doubling the size of the young republic. This land was well known to the people who lived there for centuries: the Mandans, the Hidatsa, Shoshone, Sioux, Crow, Nez Perce, and the Chinooks, but largely unknown to these new Americans. Existing maps were partial, sometimes fanciful, and none showed what Jefferson most hoped the expedition could chart: a Northwest Passage, a river system running across the continent to the Pacific. The expedition was relying on the native peoples they met to support and guide their venture, and the Mandans were the first to do so. Over the harsh winter of 1804, scouts, traders, and trappers worked with Clark, the expedition's mapmaker. Clark's maps and notations showed his mastery of scale and detail, if not grammar and spelling. Big White Chief of the Lower Mandan village gave me a sketch of the country as far as the high mountains, wrote Clark in January of 1805. Those sketches of the country would guide the expedition for the rest of the journey west, which resumed in the spring with new guides and interpreters. Among them, a 15-year-old Shoshone woman, Sacagawea, and her infant son, whom Clark fondly nicknamed Pompey. Clark charted the Missouri River through the 5 Great Falls, though his sketch only shows one, and finally to the river's source, its headwaters, near what is now Three Forks, Montana. There was no Northwest Passage. The expedition staggered on, through the Rockies and over the Continental Divide, out into the Oregon country. Clark drew and described native plants and wildlife, and native peoples and their customs. He sketched the Chinook, called Flathead Indians, because of their head-binding practices. At last, on November 7, 1805, Clark wrote, "Ocean in view, oh, the joy." What Clark had seen was only the estuary of the Columbia River, but the Columbia brought them to the Pacific Ocean a week later. It had been a year and a half since the Corps of Discovery left St. Louis. It would take them another 10 months to return overland. They reached St. Louis on September 23, 1806. Clark's final map of 1810 was finally copied and published in 1814. As Americans began to move west across the Mississippi, Clark's map would help guide hundreds, then thousands of settlers. Clark served for the next 30 years as the federal government's lead representative to the Indian nations of the West, rising to the post of Superintendent of Indian Affairs. Before his death in 1838, Clark managed the transfer of millions of acres of native people's ancestral lands to the United States government. It was William Clark's last mark on the map of the American West. Eventually, the Louisiana Purchase would be divided into 13 new states.